Yes, and I'm pleased to introduce Professor Juni Palmgren. She's a professor in biostatistics, and she is now at the Department of Medical Epidemiology and Biostatistics at Karolinska Institutet. She will speak about a Nordic Commons, a vision of an integrated Nordic research platform. And I should also add that she was formerly Secretary General for the research infrastructure at the Swedish Research Council. So please.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a wonderful afternoon so far. And several of the speakers before me mentioned that they are not strictly going to speak on the topic that were given to them. Contrary to that, I will speak on the topic I had gotten, which is Nordic Commons, but it's also the first time ever that I speak on this topic. So it's a slightly different twist. And I will now give a Nordic perspective. This is also why I asked Mats Melby about the Nordic vision. I liked the answer, and we got that reinforced by Eero Vuorio's Finnish perspective, that what is really needed is a common entry point, and we can meet in the cloud. This is something to keep in the back of our heads. I will not talk about that now, but that could be sort of a practical solution in the future. So this is about registers and biobanks, and if we go back first to the Nordic perspective, the question is, we have 26 million people in the Nordic countries, and today not very much research is done across the borders. Much can be done on the national level, but it would be wonderful if it was reasonably easy to pool the 26 million people for what we want to do. And what we have in common, this has been said by many before, I will not go into detail, but this is the registration for administrative purposes of the individuals in the country from birth to death and virtually all major incidents that happen when it comes to health and welfare. And we can connect those using the personal number. But it's not easy, not even on the national level today, to access these data. It takes time, it's cumbersome, and also then to do cross-border research is non-trivial. We also have the biobank perspective, and thanks to technology development, there is a lot we can retrieve from these human samples, and it's an intricate mass of data. And what we need to understand is actions and interactions on the different layers, genome, transcriptome, proteome, metabolome, etc. Actions and interactions within and between these layers to really eventually get a grasp, more profound grasp on mechanisms. And what do we want to use these complex data sets for? Well, to study determinants for disease, health and disease, and ultimately going into personalized medicine. For that, we do need to understand mechanistic features and classification of individuals. And what I really will talk about now is this whole entity from a data-centric perspective. And the stepping stone is the Nordic Council of Ministers gave out a booklet in 2012, which dealt with this question, and it pointed out 6 challenges that we have in the Nordic countries if we want to get coherence in the research data in this broad topic of biobanks, registers, and cohorts, of course. And that's the political perspective, organizational, legal, financial, ethical, and technical. And there's one chapter for each of these in this report. And it's also stated as a summary that the lack of a Nordic perspective for research data implies a risk of developing policies which are not aligned on the Nordic level. So we do things nationally, but it's difficult to cross the borders. And I think increasingly, and this has also been shown here today, the political perspective, the politicians being actively engaged in this process of utilizing the Nordic gold mine is crucially important. The time is past when scientists can sort of say that this is important. We now also need policy decisions. And this is, of course, specifically true for the legal perspective, aligning legislation, in particular in view of the EU General Data Protection legislation, but also ethical procedures can be simplified. And we have organizational perspective, of course. This is not going to be free to align data and to use across borders. But on the other hand, a data-centric view of science is true for all areas of research. This is pressed in the European Union. It's pressed in many other places. So there is an understanding that this needs to be done, and of course it's not going to be free. There's the ethics perspective, which Magnus talked a bit about, but I will now focus on the technical perspective. And usually when we talk about these challenges, the technical perspective is sort of left to the side. And now what I will hold on to is a vision of a technical platform. And this is what I call a Nordic Commons. I could add a Nordic Commons for person data, but I don't at this point. But this is taken from, let's see now if I make a mess of this. Yes, this is taken from NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the US, and they have set up a data science board or data science initiative, which goes across the different institutes at the National Institutes of Health, realizing that one needs to coordinate data in a technical sense as well. So it's a shared virtual space where scientists can work with the digital objects of biomedical research. And this is a system that will allow investigators to find, manage, share, use, and reuse data, software, metadata, and workflows. And there is also, and I've digested sort of quite a bit of material on the NIH homepage, but there is also a definition of components of a commons ecosystem, which is a computing environment for computation and storage in a broad sense, building on the cloud as well as on HPC resources. It's data sets, but specifically data sets that adhere to what is called the Commons Digital Object Compliance Principles. Again, this is noted at the bottom here. And this is, again, when data science is being discussed internationally. These principles have been summarized into something which now floats up in many places called the FAIR principles, which is the principles of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. So this is for the data, but then importantly also software services and tools. And there's a list of these, sort of a scalable provisioning of compute resources. You should use the resources that you need for a specific purpose. Interoperability between objects, which are more than data. It's also software and workflows. Discovery, possibility to discover the digital objects. You need to know what's around in order to be able to use it. So indexing these objects, and also principles for sharing these objects, authorization, authentication principles, and access to tools. This was talked about earlier today, that software can always be shared. These need to be systems for doing so. Access to analysis tools and pipeline workflows, and then connectivity in general. So these are the principles of a commons ecosystem. And this is also then from the NIH homepage. What does NIH do to boost this kind of development? And what they do is they put up funding resources. So this is a funding opportunity. What is the A? They have a list of these calls from the NIH, and this is one of the RO1s, which is early state development of technologies in biomedical computing, informatics, and big data science. And this is attracting scientists to work on these, to put in proposals, and then of course the NIH will do a coordinated and assess these proposals. And you can see these are different areas that go under this RO1, which actually is still ongoing. The end is 2017. It was opened in 2014. And here is fundamental research on biomedical computing included, methodologies, informatics, and big data science. Fortunately, this big data hype is just one thing in this ecosystem. And then development of new software tools and related resources, and applications of computational technologies to particular domains of biomedical research. This is just one of the calls up under the heading of data science. There are several. There's one on education as well. And this is trying to boost the activity bottom up in the scientific community. And the NIH used the term biomedical in the broadest sense. So it includes biological, biomedical, behavioral, social, environmental, and clinical studies, everything related to understanding of health and disease. And this was, I liked Camilla's picture initially, where you had health and disease in the front, and then all of these other domains actually being important to that topic. So much for NIH. Again, setting up a technical platform for data science or data handling in general is something that is done in all areas of science. So I have talked about the Nordic Commons in other occasions, but not in the way I've done now. But there people say, oh, you shouldn't confine yourself to medical data. This is important for all areas of science. But I actually think it would be good if the biomedical community with registers, biobanks, and cohorts would go for a vision sort of where they are going and actually confine it to person data and take these legislation, ethics, procedures, sensitive data handling in terms of shipping back and forth to the cloud. I don't think that's been solved yet, etc., seriously. So actually working in the domain of biomedical sciences and trying now, there is so much going on, as has been said, to pool the knowledge and put up there a transparent, understandable approach to how to actually do this. And this is registers, cohorts, biobanks, but we also have a lot of knowledge in the Nordic countries that we can tap onto in setting up this technical solution as well. And I'm aware that the Danes must have a technical solution for what they are doing, and possibly that is one that could be used also in the other countries or bits and pieces of it, etc. So this is just a vision of where one could go. There is a Nordic context in which we can start building this. And the Nordforsk has a Nordic program on health and welfare, which has several Nordic stakeholders. Key funders in the Nordic countries are part of this, putting money into it. It's a common pot initiative, and in total at the moment, I don't know the number, but there are some 100 million Norwegian crowns, I think it is. It's mainly going into research projects in this arena of health and welfare. But this program, Nordforsk program on health and welfare, is now planning to set up from next year a research infrastructure committee task force as well as an education component, which would harmonize and have a focus on the data part, but of course also on different aspects of legislation and ethics, although these parts are done better by other actors. So some coherence and hopefully being able to pool experiences now from the different Nordic countries. A Nordic Commons, yes, it aligns with things that people here have expressed, which everybody wants, but also more formally with the Nordic E-Science Action Plan 2.0, the Nordic E-Infrastructure Collaboration. This action plan was initiated by the Nordic Council of Ministers. The Nordic E-Infrastructure Collaboration is the Nordic, the different countries' IT computing service providers together who have made up a Nordic entity, which has a lot of know-how on the technical side. There is also the NIASC program, which is funded through the Nordic E-Science Globalization Initiative, but it is a program which is taking tools and techniques for biomedical sciences. So very much in the arena of what the Commons, as I described it here, is all about. The US National Institutes of Health, of course, there is something to look at. The Danish Ministry of Health vision, I don't have a reference to this, but this is the answer I've gotten, that it's in line with that, of course, and then also the recent initiatives in Finland, where I have a different reference, but very much like Eero Vuorio was taking up, and potentially several other projects. Some bits and pieces on the Nordic level exist, but these are really bits and pieces and not working in a common framework, but pretty isolated. But interesting is the Nordman project, where the statistical bureaus have decided to jointly set up, and what they are working on is a metadata system, building actually on the system that Magnus was talking about from Sweden, the root metadata system. But now this has been adopted by Statistics Sweden, but now it's also into this Nordic coordination, collaboration between the statistical bureaus, and hopefully will help us in understanding what data is available in the different countries. Then there is the Nordic Platform for Sensitive Biomedical Data, Trygve, which is set up by NAIC, and hopefully that is also a building block which can be used for the future. And there is a biobank initiative on colorectal cancer, which was set up to really test how difficult or easy it is to set up a joint biobank scientific study. And that report isn't out yet, but I think it has been quite cumbersome to get the bits and pieces together on the Nordic level. Yeah. And this is now my final slide, nearly final slide, but this Nordic Commons would actually rely on a clear ethical and legal framework for sharing data and tools across borders, and now thinking of Nordic borders. And this is not in place yet, but it really needs to be in place to be able to discuss how to actually promote Nordic research. Also, I believe this is in the pipe, it is being pushed by the European Union, and it is also in the sort of government level of the different countries to set up open access policies to research data and tools. And this is also something which is ongoing in all countries, more or less developed in the different Nordic countries. But we need to have that before we can have a platform to share. And also involvement of a broad range of Nordic key stakeholders, of course, the political level. Without political endorsement, we will continue to speak, but there will not really be action, I think. Research funding level, yes. How expensive things will be in the end, we don't know, but even to get recognition and starting off. National data owner institutions, statistics, the different statistical bureaus, yes, they have already started talking to each other, but we have boards for health and welfare, and Magnus had some 12 other authorities that provide data that are of interest. So these national data owner institutions need to be taken on board. E-science and e-infrastructure expertise, absolutely, but also scientists. And I think we do know that scientists are sometimes most conservative and don't see the need of sort of access or cross-border, etc., but are quite content with owning their samples. But this is also changing. So the Nordic countries, they should set up, I think, or at least work for something which is taking the Nordic resources into account on a personal data, in a personal data dimension, but not, of course, not working in isolation. So need to tap into the efforts which are done elsewhere for also other areas of science, and in particular the discussions of open science and data sharing in the context of the EU Open Science Cloud, whatever that is, and other international initiatives. And there are international initiatives. This data science notion is very active and alive in some corners. And we have the digital agenda for Europe. Yes, it's live there. It goes over all scientific fields, as does the RDA, the Research Data Alliance, which is working steadily and coming up with solutions to some of the problems. There's also the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, where Nordic participants were very eager when it was set up in the beginning, and now it is assembling organizations, 387, but that's an old figure, in 37 countries, trying to align genomics and health infrastructure. The Nordic countries, now this is on institutional levels, but the Nordic countries are not very visible in that context. So there are lots of things happening in the data science domain, which we should catch on to. This is my last slide, be aware. And there are many examples of the difficulties of actually getting scientists to see the merits of sharing data and tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's time for a question or a comment. Yes?
Thank you very much for a nice speech. My name is Tor-Arne Hegvik. I'm a PhD student in Bergen, and my background is that I've just completed medical school. With great interest I saw your talk, and it's very nice. And you mentioned something about education, that we need some kind of education program, and that's an opinion I share. For example, I know that some of the databases, for example, the TSD is, for example, built up around a very very difficult Linux format or something right now. And at the same time, the scientists, at least those who come from a biological background, have enough troubles just with SPSS, which is like a very basic statistics program. How is the progress of making some kind of education, basically maybe just a 2-week hard seminar, which some of, for example, the Psychiatric Genomics Consortium, they have made a 2-week very hard seminar in London. They have every year to train these new PhDs, to get them going, to learn them genetics. Is that something that should be copied, or somebody's in the progress of thinking about that should be done for big epidemiological studies utilizing huge data sets and getting people to think statistics and think data instead of think, well, how can I, instead of just trying to survive in the ocean of statistics?
Thank you. Excellent question. And it also gives me the opportunity to, because education, and you can also just think of education in all areas of science with all the digital tools available. It may be statistical programs, but also computing and et cetera, all the software development. I think education needs to adapt, and this is also on all levels of education, to adapt to the new way we are making science in the future. How should that be done? Well, it's a long journey, but what will happen within the Nordforsk program for health and welfare is that there will be an educational component in this Common Pot initiative, and the way it will go about it is to actually, like the NIH, put out a call. So there will be a call, and this will come early next year, I envision, a call for proposals for courses. And this is now actually courses that people are, or institutions are willing to deliver. And this will then be evaluated, and the course curriculum on the Nordic level will be put up. But your point, of course, it would also be very good to do an inventory in terms of what are the needs of education by scientists at different levels, because I can relate to your sort of being a bit lost among the tools available. So this will come, and this is a first step in setting up a course curriculum. I also think that tomorrow morning's session, which will talk about causal modeling in different aspects, this is a very good topic to actually set up as courses on the Nordic courses for registries and biobanks, etc. So this is a vague answer to your question.
All right, then, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.